Well, I think what we've really seen in Minnesota in the last few years that's been very interesting to watch is a state that has been pretty reliably Democratic, especially when you're looking at how the state has voted for presidential candidates, start to become more purple. Hillary Clinton barely won Minnesota in 2016, and now it's become a pretty strong battleground for Republican candidates, and I think we're going to see that play out in 2020 as well. I think you really need to do is look at a couple of congressional districts in Minnesota to see where this change is happening. The first is the 8th District of Minnesota. That's up north of here in the Duluth area. Duluth is becoming a more progressive city, whereas the rest of what we call the Iron Range, where iron mining and mining has been sort of a big industry for so long, that has become increasingly red, and they just recently elected their first Republican candidate to the House of Representatives for the first time in a long time. Now, down here in the 1st Congressional District, where we are in Rochester, over the last decade, we have elected Democrat Tim Walz to office. He decided he wasn't going to run anymore. He's now our governor. But one reason he decided not to run is that this district voted for Donald Trump in 2016, and he barely won his re-election campaign. So in 2018, the district barely elected a Republican candidate who's now in the House of Representatives.
Congressional Relations Office.
So I think the results of the 2016 presidential election, in terms of how they've resonated in Minnesota, really just depends on who you're asking. In my area down here in Rochester, you drive 20 minutes in any direction and you're still going to see some Trump signs in people's yards. What I think is very interesting is that because of this strong agricultural community in southeast Minnesota, a lot of these farmers have been hit hard by some of these trade fights that the Trump administration has been involved in. And yet when you talk to these farmers, they'll still say, you know, we're going to take some pain in the short term for what is hopefully a long-term gain. So trade has played out as a very interesting policy to sort of see how people are feeling about the Trump presidency. My sense is that if they voted for him in 2016, chances are pretty good they're going to vote for him again, even if they're frustrated with some of the policies that have affected their everyday lives. I think the impact of the 2016 election on how things played out in 2018 really came down to race by race. Again, in northern Minnesota, you saw this really solidly blue district in the Duluth area go for a Republican for the first time in a very, very long time. Down here, it was sort of the same dynamic, but in the Twin Cities, you saw people elect very progressive members of Congress, Ilhan Omar being one of them, who sort of aligned herself with this group of young, very progressive members of Congress, supporting things like the Green New Deal and that sort of thing. Two things really come out to me when I look at the election of Ilhan Omar. First of all, we see Democrats in Minnesota electing someone to Congress who is extremely on the extreme end of progressive. I would also say it represents a watershed moment in what Minnesota looks like, how diverse we're becoming. You know, the Twin Cities is a hub for refugees, specifically Somali Americans, as is Rochester. We have a lot of Somali Americans living in this part of the world too, and I think the fact that she was elected really speaks to the fact that we are becoming a more diverse state, and people in those communities really have a voice in politics for the first time. Minnesotans are notoriously dedicated to civic life. We have voter turnout that exceeds many states in the nation, even in primaries. My recollection is that the 2018 primary was extraordinarily high, as was turnout just on election day. I think we're going to continue to see that, especially when one of our own is going to be on the ballot. I'm sure that will motivate people to get out to the polls.
I stand before you as the first woman elected to the United States Senate from the state of Minnesota to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
I think the thing to know about Senator Amy Klobuchar is that she has been extraordinarily popular in Minnesota, essentially since she entered office. Her approval ratings have always been very high, and that has not changed since she decided to run for president. My guess is that a lot of Democrats in Minnesota are very supportive of her running because she's well-liked. I think the big question is whether her career so far representing Minnesota is something that appeals to Democrats more widely. The criticism locally of her is that she has been too safe. She hasn't taken on really big challenging issues, and she's been dismissive of some of the big ideas that you hear Democrats talking about. Then again, If you talk to other Democrats in the state, they might say she's the perfect candidate because she can bridge that divide between the coasts and middle America. She can play well with blue-collar voters who maybe we lost last time to President Donald Trump. She might be the perfect candidate to bridge that gap, but again, it's going to depend on who shows up on primary day and really what they're looking for. For this presidential election, Minnesota's primary is on March 3rd. Well, I think having it on March 3rd sort of puts Minnesota at the front end of deciding who the Democratic candidate will be. I think it certainly bumps things up earlier in the process, whereas we were having these long drawn-out caucuses later in the summer previously, and I think that maybe created some angst around party divisions between who the party would support, and I definitely think it also motivates people to get out a little bit earlier as well. My sense about Minnesota's interest in this presidential campaign is that it would be high even if Amy Klobuchar was not on the ticket, because they're keenly interested in how President Donald Trump will fare, whether he'll have another 4 years or not. And again, Minnesotans love to vote, so I'm sure they will all be out there in droves, both at the primary and on Election Day.